the point of that knife, a man's life is at stake.
I'm just saying it's possible.
And I say it's not possible.
Okay, so you know how much we love getting those source requests from you, the learner. Well, this one's pretty special. We're diving into Reginald Rose's 12 Angry Men.
A classic.
Absolutely. But alongside the screenplay, you've also sent over this really insightful article. It uses the play to analyze groupthink.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do today is, well, it's like we're cracking open that intense jury room and seeing just how persuasion, doubt, how like a single thought can actually change what seems like, like a rock solid opinion. And we're going to give you those real world insights without making it a boring psych lecture.
Exactly. What makes this so fascinating is that 12 Angry Men, it's not just a gripping story, right? It's also this amazing tool to understand how we make decisions in groups, how those first impressions, those snap judgments can become, they can feel like absolute truth. And the power, sometimes it's surprising, of one voice saying, hold on, are we really sure about this?
Right, like questioning the obvious. So let's picture ourselves in that jury room. It's sweltering, tensions are high, and right off the bat, 11 jurors vote guilty. But let's break that down for a second. What were those key pieces of information that led to that almost instant consensus? It was pretty quick, right?
Yeah, early on in Act 1, there's some testimony that seems, pretty damning. You have the old man living downstairs. He claims he heard the boy shouting, "I'm gonna kill you," and then boom, a body hitting the floor. Then there's the woman across the street. She says she actually witnessed the stabbing. Through her window, no less. And the prosecution really hammered on the fact that the boy couldn't remember details about the movies he said he was watching. So his alibi, it starts to look pretty shaky. And it's these points that really get woven together. They build this picture of guilt for most of the jurors, and that's why you get that quick agreement. But what's really interesting here is how readily everyone just accepts this information. There's not a lot of questioning at first, which, it could be an early warning sign that the group's more focused on reaching a decision fast than a decision that's truly well thought out.
Right, almost like they just read the headlines and made up their minds. But then we have Juror 8. He's the one who throws a wrench in the works. What can you tell us about his initial stance? Why is it so significant?
He's the key, right? Because in that first vote, he's the only one who says not guilty. But here's the thing, and this is crucial. He doesn't necessarily believe the boy is innocent. He just thinks the case deserves more than a quick once-over. It's like he's saying, hold on, this is a life we're talking about. Don't we owe it to him and to ourselves to really dig into this? And that simple act of disagreement, just that one not guilty, it totally disrupts the group. It forces them to confront the possibility that they might be wrong. And this willingness to stand apart, even without being absolutely certain, that's what sets the whole drama in motion.
It's like that moment of hesitation, right? When someone refuses to just blindly follow along. And that sets the stage for everything that comes next. So we have 11 for guilty, 1 for not guilty. And then things start to shift. Let's get into some of those key moments where Juror 8 starts poking holes in the prosecution's case. And by doing that, he's also challenging how everyone is thinking. Where should we start? What are the switch knife? That seems like a good place.
Okay, so the prosecution, they presented the switch knife as really unusual, right? Like it was super rare, making it easy to identify. And their point was, this was the murder weapon and it must have belonged to the defendant. It was kind of their smoking gun.
And then, boom.
Yeah.
Juror 8 pulls out a matching knife, one he bought locally for a couple of bucks. Talk about undercutting a major piece of the prosecution's argument. That had to be a tense moment.
It was. And that's exactly what it did. Juror 8 just casually takes this identical knife out of his pocket, and suddenly the prosecution's theory falls apart. It throws everything into question. If a similar knife could be bought so easily, maybe the one used in the crime wasn't so unique after all. Maybe it didn't belong to the boy. And what's really interesting is Juror 3's reaction. He just completely rejects this new information, says it proves absolutely zero. It's like he can't even consider the possibility that he might be wrong. And that's so typical of groupthink. Once a group settles on an idea, it's tough to change their minds, even when new evidence pops up.
It's like once a story takes hold, it becomes almost impossible to rewrite it, even with new facts. But Juror 8 persists. He keeps pushing. Okay, so let's move on to the old man's testimony about hearing that threat. What happens when we take a closer look at the details there?
So the old man, he told the court that he heard the boy yelling, "I'm gonna kill you!" And then almost immediately, the thud of a body. Sounds pretty clear-cut, right? But Juror 8, he picks up on something everyone else seems to have missed the noise from the elevated train. He reminds everyone that the train was passing right by the old man's window. And he gets really specific about the timing. The train takes about 10 seconds to pass, about 2 seconds for each car. And if you remember, the woman across the street said the train had already been passing for at least 6 seconds before she heard the body fall.
So the train would have been super loud, right? How could the old man have possibly heard anything over that racket? Especially a specific phrase like that.
It doesn't really add up, does it? And then Juror 9, he chimes in with this really insightful observation. He looks at the old man, this guy in a worn-out jacket, kind of hunched over, and he says, this is a man who's been ignored his whole life. And nobody. He suggests that maybe, just maybe, the old man, wanting to be heard, wanting to feel important, convinced himself that he heard those words. It's not necessarily a conscious lie, but it's a reminder that memory is subjective. It can be shaped by our desires and needs.
Yeah, that's a good point. It shows how human psychology plays into testimony, how it's not always about intentionally misleading, but sometimes about our own need for validation. And it adds another layer of doubt to the case.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about the other part of the old man's story? Him seeing the boy running away.
Yeah, so the old man, he says he gets to his front door and sees the boy running down the stairs just 15 seconds after hearing the body hit the floor. Seems straightforward enough, right? Except Juror 8 starts looking at the layout of the apartment. He points out that to get from the bed to the front door, you'd have to walk 12 feet to the bedroom door, then another 43.5 feet down the hall. And that's a lot of ground to cover in 15 seconds, especially for an older person.
And to prove his point, he actually recreates the whole thing right there in the jury room. He paces it out, even uses imaginary canes to mimic the old man's slow movements. What does that show?
When he times it, it takes him 31 seconds. That's more than double the time the old man claimed. And remember, Juror 8 is a younger, presumably healthier guy. So for the old man, with his age and maybe some health issues, it's physically impossible for him to have covered that evidence and seen the boy running away in just 15 seconds.
So basically everything the old man claims to have seen and heard, well, it's being called into question. And that takes us to the woman across the street, the one who says she actually saw the stabbing. That seems pretty solid, doesn't it? Like, how do you argue with an eyewitness?
Yeah, at first glance, you'd think that's a slam dunk for the prosecution. She says she saw the whole thing through her window, even with the elevated train passing by. But as with everything else, there's a crucial detail that gets overlooked in the initial rush to judgment.
And what's that detail? What's the catch?
Turns out, this woman, she wears glasses. Bifocals, to be exact. And as one of the jurors points out, she wouldn't have been wearing them in bed right. It's like, imagine being woken up in the middle of the night, rolling over, looking through your window, through the windows of a moving train, and clearly seeing someone commit a crime in a split second, all without your glasses. It's pretty far-fetched, isn't it?
It really makes you wonder about eyewitness accounts, how reliable they actually are. There's so many factors that can influence what someone sees and remembers. And speaking of factors, what about the angle of the stab wound? That was a big part of the prosecution's case too, right?
Yeah, they claimed that because the boy was shorter than his father, the stab wound would have had to be made in a downward motion. Makes sense on the surface. Juror 3 even acts it out, crouching down to show how it would have happened.
But then Juror 5 brings in a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
And it's based on his own life experience, which is something most of the other jurors don't have.
Exactly. Juror 5 grew up in a rough neighborhood. He's seen knife fights. And he knows that someone who's experienced with a switch knife wouldn't stab downwards. They'd use an underhand grip, which would make the wound go upwards, not down. It totally contradicts the prosecution's theory. And it's a great example of how important it is to have different viewpoints in a group. Juror 5's personal knowledge challenges those assumptions that everyone else just took for granted. It's like a reminder that we all see the world through our own lenses, shaped by our experiences. And when we bring those different lenses together, we get a much clearer picture. So as Juror 8 keeps raising these doubts, that the initial consensus, that almost unanimous guilty verdict, it starts to crumble. And this is where that article you sent about groupthink comes in. Can you explain how the play shows groupthink in action, especially in those early stages of deliberation? The article describes groupthink as this tendency to prioritize agreement over actually evaluating different options. It's like wanting everyone to get along becomes more important than making the right decision. And we see this happening in the jury room right from the start. That super fast initial vote, everyone just going along with the majority, it shows that there's pressure to conform, to not rock the boat. And when someone like Juror 8 does speak up and challenge the group, he's met with hostility, not curiosity. It's like they're threatened by the idea that they could be wrong. And that's a danger sign, because this need to maintain unity can actually stifle critical thinking.
So it's not just about being afraid to disagree. It's about the group becoming blind to alternative possibilities. And how does Juror 8 fight against that? I mean, he's facing a lot of pressure, even personal attacks from some of the jurors, especially from Juror 3, who's like super invested in that guilty verdict.
He does it in a few really smart ways. First, he keeps questioning the prosecution's assumptions. He refuses to just accept things at face value. He pushes everyone to look at the evidence again, but this time with more critical eye. And he offers different interpretations, different ways of understanding the facts. It's like he's saying, okay, we all agree on the story, but what if there's another story, another explanation we haven't considered? And perhaps most importantly, he stays calm. Even when he's being attacked, he doesn't get defensive or emotional. He sticks to the facts, to logic, to reason. And that starts to have an effect on the others. They see that maybe, just maybe, they were too quick to judge.
Right, like he's modeling a different way of thinking, a way that's based on questioning and evidence, not just going with the flow. And we actually see how this starts to change the votes. It's like a domino effect. Can you walk us through how the jurors start changing their minds?
It happens gradually. Juror 9, the older gentleman, he's the first to switch to not guilty. Maybe he sees himself in the accused, or maybe he's just more willing to consider different perspectives. Then Juror 5, the one with the experience with switch knives, he changes his vote too. He realizes that his own knowledge contradicts what the prosecution said. And then Juror 6, he's a thoughtful guy, but initially pretty hesitant. He follows suit. And then there's Juror 7, he's more interested in ending the deliberation than anything else, but even he eventually changes his mind when he sees that the deadlock isn't going to break. Even Juror 12, the advertising guy, he reevaluates his position. And then the foreman, who's focused on maintaining order, he sees how the tide is turning and changes his vote. And finally, Juror 4, the really logical one, he's initially the most convinced of the boy's guilt. But even he can't ignore the problems with the woman's testimony, especially when they realize she wasn't wearing her glasses.
It's interesting, isn't it? Each juror has their own moment of realization, their own tipping point. It shows that persuasion isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. But the play also highlights how personal bias can influence those initial guilty votes.
Definitely. We see how those preconceived notions can cloud judgment. Juror 3, he's so insistent on the boy's guilt, and it seems like it's rooted in his own troubled relationship with his son. And Juror 10, his prejudice against the boy's background is so obvious. It clearly shapes how he sees the evidence and makes him resistant to changing his mind. It's like a reminder that we all bring our own baggage to the table, and sometimes it prevents us from seeing things clearly.
It's like those biases make us cling to our initial beliefs even harder, and they can make us more susceptible to groupthink. Which brings us to the climax of the play, Juror 3's final stand. He doesn't give up easily.
No, he doesn't. As more and more jurors change their votes, he gets increasingly agitated. He's desperate to hold on to that guilty verdict. But his arguments become more emotional, less based on reason. And it all culminates in that outburst where he almost attacks Juror 8, yelling, "I'll kill him!" It's a chilling moment.
It really reveals the raw emotion driving his stance. It's not about justice anymore. It's about something personal.
Exactly. It's like all that pent-up anger and frustration boils over, and it exposes the fact that he's not really thinking clearly.
And it's in that moment of losing control that he seems to finally break. So what happens with that final vote?
Faced with the fact that he's completely alone, that his arguments have been debunked, and that his own outburst has revealed his lack of reason, he finally gives in. He says, not guilty. But it's not a moment of genuine conviction. It's more like a defeated surrender. And with that, the jury reaches a unanimous not guilty verdict, and they all quietly leave, changed by their experience in that sweltering jury room.
So for you, the learner, what are the big takeaways from 12 Angry Men? It's clearly more than just a courtroom drama.
It really highlights how dangerous it is to just blindly agree with the group. It shows the power of asking questions, of challenging assumptions, of speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable. And it reminds us that critical thinking is essential in every area of life. Whether you're on a jury, in a meeting at work, or even just having a conversation with friends, it's so important to think for yourself, to evaluate the information, and to be willing to disagree.
And that brings us to our final thought for you. Take a moment and think about your own life. How often do you find yourself just going along with the crowd? How often do you let those initial assumptions or the pressure to conform stop you from really digging deeper, from questioning things? What can you do to be more like Juror 8? To be the one who raises those tough questions and pushes everyone to think harder?
If this deep dive has gotten you thinking, and we hope it has, I'd strongly recommend revisiting 12 Angry Men. Watch the movie, read the play, see it with fresh eyes. And if you want to explore the idea of groupthink further, check out the work of Irving Janis. He's the psychologist who coined the term, and his research is fascinating. He really gets into the psychology of how groups can make bad decisions, even when they're made up of smart, well-intentioned people. And this story, it keeps resonating because it speaks to something universal, right? The fight for justice, the search for truth, and the courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when everyone else disagrees.
And those are themes that never go out of style.
For more videos, don't forget to subscribe and like the videos.